everyone. Welcome to the Courtenay Turner Radio Hour. It's an honor to be here with you on WWCR Worldwide Radio. It is Monday, February 24th, and this episode that I have for you today is actually a clip from a live stream that I did on, and you can find the full live stream because it was longer than an hour, and that can be found on my website or any of my podcast platforms. So my website is CourtenayTurner.com, and I spell my name like Courtenay. So that's CourtenayTurner.com. And that is where you can find all of my podcasts. I also have a Substack where you can find all of my articles. I have some articles up on my website as well. And of course, you can support the work that I am doing. If you are watching this, then you are probably not watching it on my Substack, because my Substack is where all of my episodes go first, and so you get early access, and they are also ad-free over there. So you can support my work by becoming a paid member of my Substack. That is Courtenay Substack, COURTENAY 'S Substack. And this is where you can become you can do a monthly subscription. You can do it for the year. It's a little bit cheaper. Or if you want to be super generous and help me out, you can become a founding member. And for those paid members, as I said, you do get ad-free early access to all of my podcasts. You will also get a membership to our monthly book club. And this is where we will have intimate meetings that you'll have access to join, and you can read along with me, and we will have some fun discussion. Yeah, so check out those, and any support that you can give, I greatly appreciate it. And now we'll watch I'll play for you a little clip from this episode that I did. It was a live stream I called it Humanity 2.0, Immanentizing the Eschaton, because that seems like what they're doing. It does seem like that's kind of the essence of this bringing about this cyber Satan through an AI god. And I don't think that it's going to be a singular kind of AI god per se. I don't think it's going to be a one authoritative entity or even a one sentient being, as they may have you believe. And I do think they will try to convince you that, at least that there is sentience of these machines, which I don't believe will happen. But whether or not they do, if they convince enough people, then the effect is going to be essentially the same. So, but I do think there will be something sort of like, I know they call it, the mark of the beast, but I think it's going to be more like a beast system, where you're going to see all of these various modalities that have AI, qualities. So whether it be the AI governance, of the AI world society that gets kind of replicated. We're seeing the digital governance summits now pop up in all these states in the United States. Like every state is having a conference on digital governance. So whether it's that, whether it's some sort of a cryptocurrency that might be potentially linked to your biometric data, and where that's put on a blockchain ledger, and we live in a gamified, tokenized economy. And I think there are people who are going to opt in and do it under a decentralized banner, and it's still going to have the same impact. May not be a central bank digital currency where it's one currency for the world, but I do think that there is going to be some sort of a digital tokenized economy. That at least that's what they're laying the groundwork for. So potentially we'll stop it. I don't know. And potentially there will be freedom fighters who come up with some sort of a technological alternative where we will have some sort of a digital currency, but it will be truly private and decentralized. And I'm not quite sure of how that's going to work, but I always hold out the hope that that's possible. So, and I know there are people who are trying, but I also know there are other people who are claiming that that's what they're offering, when in reality what they're offering is more like decentralization leading to a world brain in the H.G. Wells sense of world brain. So, Yes, so this is, I hope you enjoy this clip from the live stream. And if you want to see the rest of it, then you can head on over to my website and find a platform that is most convenient for you. And you can listen to, or watch the rest of it. Thanks so much. Hello, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. We are live. I thought I would do a little continuation of the show that I aired yesterday. It was for my radio show, and I always post that up on my podcast channel, so you can watch the video version of it as well, and for my radio audience to watch the replay. And that can all be found at CourtenayTurner.com and on all of my various platforms. And I always run out of time, so I thought that we would continue, and I had titled this one The Immanentization of the Eschaton, Humanity 2.0, and I think that probably bears a little bit of an explanation. My husband said that most people won't know what immanentizing the Eschaton means, but I suspect you do, but we'll just cover it. Essentially, politically speaking, it's this idea of bringing heaven on earth. And usually, it encompasses very utopian types of ideas. This is political theory and theology. To immanentize the eschaton is generally pejorative phrase referring to the attempts to bring about utopian conditions in the world and effectively create heaven on earth. Theologically, the belief that is akin to postmillennialism as reflected in the social gospel of 1880 to 1930 era, as well as Protestant reform movements during the Second Great Awakening in the 1830s and 1840s, such as abolitionism. And I thought that that was kind of a good way to sum up what I feel like is going on, because essentially we are seeing this. It is very much this political movement trying to bring heaven on earth, right? I had talked about the cyber Satan is what I feel like they're trying to bring about, or a lot of Christians would refer to it as like a beast system. They usually talk about the mark of the beast, but I think it's more of a beast system when we talk about AI and cyber Satan, and I'll explain what I mean in just a minute. But what I'm seeing is this battle between what we have in, regardless of your worldview, but, definitely, speaking to a more biblical framework, accepting there's a premise of a creator, a benevolent creator who has created the world and, earth and, the nature around us. And of course, all of the individuals in it. And that's kind of the natural order of things versus this desire, which I would argue is a transhuman kind of a mission to synthesize everything. I don't really know how to say that, but to, it's not just synthesizing, but to make everything into a synthetic version here on Earth, and to make it, they see it as this utopian, although I would argue the result would be more dystopian rather than utopian. Hopefully I'm wrong. But that's kind of the direction it looks like it's going. It doesn't look like, I know there are a lot of very well-meaning people who are involved in these movements, whether the technocrats or the transhumanists. And that's not to say I agree with them, but I think there are really very well-intended, well-meaning people who subscribe to these philosophies, even post-humanism. I actually think there are a lot of people in that movement who don't necessarily have a bird's eye view of the control grid that's being created. They really think that this will be benefiting humanity, benefiting the planet, doing all these wonderful things. But essentially, they're playing God. That's really what it boils down to. They think that they need that somehow man, and usually it's this elect group of man, or unelected rather, but elite as they perceive it, a group of people who they perceive will be the ones who should create this synthetic world, and that somehow that will be a more perfect world, and that we can have an immortal existence here on Earth. I don't think that these plans will come to fruition, quite honestly. I think that they will fail just because it's like most plans of humans, even the brightest, the best, and the most well-meaning, they often fail, or rather, I shouldn't say they completely fail, but, they're flawed. I happen to think the United States is, the system of government. It's strayed very far from what it was intended to be, but is a beautiful system and is one of the best in the world. And I'm biased. I'm here in America. So, but I do think that it has afforded freedoms for a lot of people, not just here in America. And it has provided a beacon of hope for freedom and liberty around the world. And all that being said, it's predicated on the framework of classical liberalism, which is inherently flawed. I think there's a lot of merit in it, but it was created by humans, so it is flawed. And I think we'd be naive to think otherwise. And much like our founding documents, I think that the Constitution is something that needs tremendous restoration. And I think that, again, the hopes for the free will of humanity lie largely in the restoration of that document. That being said, that document is incredibly flawed because, again, it was created by human beings and we're flawed, so we're not capable of creating perfection. But there are people who believe that they can create perfection. And this is, I think, the crux of this battle. And I think this is also the crux of the future and where we're headed. And so I thought maybe I would, I would read a quote. I would start with a couple of quotes, actually. But I think that there's kind of two camps, and I'm not sure that they're really separate. Sometimes I think that they're intentionally created as dichotomous Hegelian poles, and other times I think that, I actually think both are existing. I think that there are people who are using them as a dichotomous pole, Hegelian dialectic, in order to create the synthesis desired, for their telos, to support their telos. And then I think there are also people who really do fall into these camps. There are what I called last time, like the spiritual eugenicists. And these people tend to be in the kind of mindset that's very aligned with the theosophical precepts, the Neoplatonic kind of precept. But this is really this idea that, we evolve spiritually, this notion of there being ascended masters, and that those who don't have the ability to spiritually evolve will be subsumed and reincarnated. And then there's the others who I think are more in line with a technocratic vision, where they really think that we have to manipulate this evolving. We have to use technology, and we'll get to this philosophy a little bit later, but I would put them in the category of accelerationists, where they actually think we need to use technology to accelerate, essentially creating the cyber Satan. And I'm this is a reductionistic explanation for the moment. It's way more nuanced than that. And there was actually warring factions within the accelerationists. There were the left and the right accelerationists, and this is actually a whole group of philosophy I was actually not very familiar with at all. So thank you to my friend Matt Errett, who sent me this very long article by, I believe it was Jules Evans, and we'll get to that in the end, talking about the accelerationist movement, which was kind of a fringe movement, and how it influenced a lot of what looks like it influenced the MAGA movement currently. And I would agree with his analysis. I think he did a great job. I don't think I've now looked at some of his other work, and I don't always agree with him, but I think he did a really fantastic job with this piece. So we'll get into that in a bit. But so I see them kind of these two camps, and oftentimes they fuse. It's much like when you look at the UN, right? We have the UN as a centralized governing body, right, for global governance, as they call it. And then we also have this body, this underpinning of creating this one world religion. And I've talked quite a bit about this pretty extensively. Of course, in the last episode I did, we talked about Alice Bailey, who was her brainchild was Lucius Trust, which was the publishing company for the UN, and it stands today as a consultancy for the UN. They're kind of like the spiritual underbelly of the UN, and they were originally Lucifer Publishing, and Alice Bailey herself, much like her mentor Madame Blavatsky, who had Lucifer magazine, and some of her peers, Annie Besant, they were Luciferian, and that's very explicit in their writing, that they believe Lucifer was the light bearer who was bringing the gnosis and illuminating man, and let the plan of love and light work out, and that is what they are referring to there. So they kind of have a Gnostic, inverted view of the biblical framework. And that I feel like there's those two. If we look at the UN, and the one is kind of this one world religion that Alice Bailey believed it was her mission in life, to execute the vision of the Freemasons, which was to create a one world religion. She had an ascended master tell her this from the time she was a little girl. So that does look like what they are doing. That does look like their mission is to create a one world theosophical religion, or they call it philosophy of evolving perennialism. But I think a one world religion is very useful and necessary in many ways in order to usher people into a global governance. And I think that, not everybody who subscribes to one or the other belief system, meaning that we need global governance or that we need a one world religion, necessarily sees the two as being intertwined. But I think that there are people, the marionettes, if you will, who are, closer to the top. I think they're very aware that one funnels the other because, having people engaged in a shared worldview is a great way to socially engineer people into a control grid, of global governance. And it does look like that global governance is going to be under AI. And the AI world society, which is why I call it a cyber Satan, and this is why I reference it as more of a beast system, because while they're building out this AI world society, which is very much a top-down, authoritative kind of control system, and it's very explicitly laid out already. I mean, you go to AI World Society City, remaking the world toward the age of global enlightenment, and there you have it. Is this this is kind of a nod to the New Age movement. So, they're telling you, I think that's the esoteric messaging that, the initiated know that the two are very much inexorably linked. And you can see it in the semiotics, right? This like seraphim looking kind of figure, the global enlightenment mountain, the house of honor. But they have laid out this very explicit kind of blueprint for what the AI world society will look like. And this is Global Enlightenment Club, the history of a house with the wings. But they, lay this out, and we with all of their Internet of Nanobio things and using 6G and how AI is going to supplant human governments, and they talk about all these various nodes on the world, where you have Ukraine as the central hub for all of the interlinking, interoperable AI cities, which will be like this 15-minute cities, smart cities, essentially. And I've talked about this quite extensively, but that is laid out, and that does look like a top-down kind of centralized system. However, I think that that may work in certain cultures. I think in the East, they might be more amenable to something like this. And not to say that there aren't, freedom fighters in the East who would push back. There absolutely are. I think within every kind of system, there's always the people who are pushing back. There's always that battle of the, people who want to preserve free will versus those who want to control others. So that battle exists, I think, everywhere. However, I think in the West, it's very unlikely that will, be readily accepted. There's always those who will. We saw this 5 years ago. There were lots of people ready to, jump on board and do whatever the authorities said, whatever anybody in the white lab coats or the politicians said that they should, cover their faces or they should take experimental drugs, and they lined up. There's always going to be those people, but I think through the West is going to be more of an opt-in kind of a system. And I've talked about things like the network state, I've talked about, this game bee kind of social operating system for civilization. There are many kind of variations of this, but it's an opt-in, decentralized. And I've talked about this, over the last few episodes as well, where H.G. Wells actually talked about the conduit for the world brain. He wrote a book on the world brain, and the conduit to this world brain was going to be decentralization. And at the time, he wasn't talking so much about technology, although he certainly had the vision, but the technology hadn't quite caught up. But he talked about, the institutions, like the academic institutions and, the various, that those institutions would be decentralized hubs of ideas, and that was going to create the world brain. And now we have that capability through technology in a really, I think, kind of a way that's even potentially more scary than what they might have envisioned possible. And again, I hope I'm wrong on all of that. But let's start with our lovely Barbara Marx Hubbard, a quote that she had said. She said, "I think we are seeing the emergence of a universal species. We're going to have extended life, extended intelligence, extended contact throughout the universe that will be freed up from the repetitive labor, and the species itself will evolve into a co-created humanity. But if we stay self-centered, separate, competitive, overpopulating, and polluting, we won't make it." All right, she had this whole vision that we had to co-create and co-evolve into the superorganism of humanity through conscious evolution, right? Her mission is to tell the story of the birth of ourselves as a universal humanity, right? And this also comes from, this idea of Homo universalis, awakening all of us to our unique opportunity to participate through our own conscious evolutions. It is all about collectivism. And we are seeing a breakthrough of more people becoming conscious of God, supernature, spirit, or tendency of the higher order, a transcending impulse of higher evolution, she continued. Hubbard, this time, was 81, and she shared some fascinating paths of her life and how she turned from housewife into a futurist, and her relationship with Buckminster Fuller, right? Remember, she called him Bucky, and she told Bucky how she took it upon herself to rewrite the New Testament because, of course, it needed rewriting by her. And she was very excited about this. So she wrote about how she had this whole conversation with her dear friend Bucky. And this quote is from, and she also talks about her details of how she ran for vice president in 1984. And this is in the book that was kind of a biography that Neil Donald Walsh, who is an evolutionary leader, a member of these evolutionary leader organization, and he wrote The Mother of Invention and the Future of You. What a title. So I thought that kind of sets the stage for exactly, what is going on. And my friend John Kleisick, wrote a really great article titled Barbara Marx Hubbard, the grandmother of transhumanism. And I think in many ways she was. Certainly she didn't coin the term. I believe, that title goes to Julian Huxley in 1957, his article, what was it, New Bottles for Red Wine. But he was also a eugenicist, UNESCO, and he wrote about the mission statement for UNESCO was actually eugenics. But I think that the concept is very much what we are seeing today, right? This idea that we have to move into the age of Aquarius, the age of the collective, the collaborative. We can't be selfish, which by selfish they mean self-interested, competitive, which is not always a bad thing, right? This is where a lot of ingenuity stems. It's where a lot of creativity comes from. It's where a lot of progress, and not in the negative sense of progress, but really true progress comes from this competitive nature and this desire to be better than we were yesterday, and better versions of ourselves. But they want us to be collective. So they want us to be a world brain, a global brain, a collective brain, a noosphere. So, yes. All right. So then I thought I would read another quote from someone who a name might be very familiar to all of you, who has talked a lot about this transhumanism. And in the 21st century, you all know Harari, right? The next big project of humankind will be to acquire for us the divine powers of creation and destruction and upgrade Homo sapiens into Homo Dea. So, for us to become man god, essentially, right? That's what that translates to. He says that humankind will turn itself into God by using three types of engineering. Bioengineers will take the old sapiens body and intentionally rewrite its genetic code, rewrite its brain circuits, alter its biochemical imbalance, and even grow entirely artificial limbs. Cyborg engineers will go a step further, merging the organic body with non organic devices such as bionic hands, artificial eyes, or millions of nanorobots that will navigate our bloodstream, diagnose problems, and repair damages. So before I go on, I did that whole episode on the biodigital convergence, and we went through some of these things. This is not like new emerging technology. We have synthetic biology. There are conferences on it every year. There are hundreds of schools all across the world that are, all around the world that are doing training a whole new generation of people to be skilled in synthetic biology, biotechnology, the Internet of Nanobio things, all of these things. And we talked about in COVID, they did these, wireless body area networks. And you can go look that up on Wikipedia. I mean, it's a pretty public, easy, quick search. The technology is not something that's super simple to understand at first. I will, concede that it might take a little bit of time to get familiar with, just like any kind of jargon. It's like learning a new language. And the science is pretty detailed. But, right, I had posted about the Purdue University of Engineering doing the Internet of Bodies. This is a whole field. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not science fiction, unfortunately. Now, that's not to say that it's a, mass scale, or that everybody has been hacked necessarily. Although with cybernetics, I think to some degree we have been already. I mean, we're all kind of like glued to our screens and our phones. And, I think the cybernetic effects, which I'm going to get into, I need to move along. I'm moving very slowly. I apologize. So, yeah. So, okay. And I'm just seeing the chat. Hello, everyone. Yes, the geoengineering neuro project for sure. Cochlear implants, I put that in different categories. So those of you who are not familiar, I'm personally hearing impaired. I am not a candidate for the cochlear implant. And in fact, my father was like a huge fan of Rush Limbaugh when I was growing up. It really like funny kind of side story, but he went through this phase where he really liked Shaggy. And my sister will still tell me, like, remember when Daddy went through his Shaggy phase and we didn't have to listen to talk radio on the way to school? Yeah, because all we listened to was talk radio. And he loved Rush Limbaugh, and Rush got the cochlear implant. And I remember my father saying, why don't you get a cochlear implant? And I remember being so insulted that my own father didn't know I wasn't a candidate for the cochlear implant, because mine is nerve damage. It was in utero, but it's not cochlea related at all. But that being said, I do wear hearing aids, bilateral hearing aids. I didn't get them until I was almost 6 years old. I actually learned how to speak by reading lips, because I didn't have hearing aids until, well after I was speaking and reading and writing and all of that. But I don't see that as transhuman, and I don't see that as like synthetic biology. That's like enhancement. I don't see it as a transhuman mission at all. I think there's a difference. And I tried to make this very clear in my biodigital convergence episode, that some of this technology is amazing and could actually do good for humanity. I am not opposed to technology. I'm not somebody who thinks we need to just revert back to, pre-industrial era. And in many ways, that's actually what they say they want, right? So they can put us into a neo-feudal system and a control grid using the technology. It's kind of like Game B says how Game A is so extravagant extractive and exploitative. However, Game B is going to exploit and extrapolate the technology from Game A in order to create Game B. But they don't seem to see how that sounds a little hypocritical, but I don't know. Maybe they have a good justification for that. But either way, I do think that technology has contributed to tremendous advancements of humankind. I'm personally very grateful for the hearing aids, and if I was a cochlea implant, candidate, I might consider one. I do see those as different. It's not quite the same thing as trying to create, cyborgs and superhuman kinds of creatures. I do think that that's different, but that's just my personal opinion on that. Okay, where was I? The third kind of engineering will dispense with organic parts altogether. So he's talking about this idea of using synthetic biology, right, where we're going to merge parts of human and machine, and they're already doing that. They already have the capacity for this on so many levels. You just listed a couple of them, but we know they have the nanobot technology. We know that they can do wireless tissue engineering. They can take actual components of organic life, and this is what the DARPA hydrogel is all about, right? They can take material that can behave like human, even though it's not. And they also can take what they call organic, but it's organic in terms of the chemical organic, the periodic table, not necessarily meaning human. But they're talking about also dispensing with it altogether, right? This is moving towards a post-human world. And that's, a subcategory of transhumanism. It's like there are the people who subscribe to the belief system that we're going to have transhuman, which is this cyborg kind of merging with machines and, having AI dictate a lot of authority, decision making, our medicine, our agriculture. But then there's the subcategory of people who actually believe we're going to move into a completely post-human world. I don't know how that plays out. I've read some of their literature, and it just, I can't really reconcile how they actually think that in practical application this is going to be a thing, but they do seem to be in favor of it. So neural networks will be replaced by intelligent software, which could surf both virtual and non-virtual world, free from. So I don't know if we caught that. That means not just in the interweb, but also in real world application. Free from limitations of organic chemistry. Once the human mind has been separated from its biological base, our human history will come to an end and a completely new process will begin. He argues that liberalism is based on ideas inherited from religion, which is why I keep, addressing these religious underpinnings and, not just religious, but this worldview, like the evolving perennialism. Blavatsky says it's not a religion. It's a worldview, a philosophy, but, it's essentially a religious sentiment. So from religion such as that, he argues that liberalism is based on ideas inherited from religion, such as the soul and free will. I would agree that that's absolutely correct. Neuroscience undermines the belief that human beings have a single and indivisible self. And once we accept that there is no soul and that humans have no inner essence, the idea of free will will no longer make sense. And this is his quote, is when a neuron fires an electric charge, this may be either deterministic reaction to the external stimuli, or it might be the outcome of a random event, such as the spontaneous decomposition of a radioactive atom. Neither option leaves any room for free will. The sacred word freedom turns out to be just like the soul, an empty term that carries no discernible meaning. Free will exists only in the imaginary stories we humans have invented. And I think this is really at the heart of, this dualistic battle. It's the people who believe in, I've said many times that was like my whole impetus in starting this podcast, was that I felt the free will of humanity was in jeopardy. And there you have it. He doesn't even believe that it's a thing. And he's not alone. I think he's echoing the sentiment of there are many others who subscribe to this belief system that we don't actually have a soul, that we're just a bunch of, atoms and neurons firing around, and that it's all stimuli reaction. And this is so much of our world today has actually been shaped by this worldview. Unfortunately, I've talked about the whole field of psychology was actually predicated on this worldview. I'm not saying all psychologists subscribe to it. However, Wilhelm Wundt would be considered the grandfather of the field of psychology. Interestingly enough, he's a direct descendant of, I think it was a Casimir Karl Kirchenrath Wundt. I may have mixed up the order of those names, but his code name in the Illuminati was Raphael. And I think that that's relevant because the Illuminati was actually called the Order of the Perfectibilis, right? So there was this notion that humans could be perfectible, that they could be perfected. Sorry, perfectible, I don't think. Yeah, that's not the right word. But they could be perfected, right? Again, that lies the battle, right? Are we becoming, or do we have an internal essence? Do we have an eternal essence? I think these are the heart of the questions. And because he believed that humans were devoid of a soul, Wilhelm Wundt, he believed that the whole Skinnerian lab rat model was perfectly acceptable and a viable way to train human beings and to teach them and to work with them. And the whole field is actually downstream from that concept. Again, that doesn't mean that all psychologists subscribe to that. That doesn't mean that everybody in that field necessarily has, is in agreement with that, but they are operating on that foundation. That is the foundation for the entire field. That's just one example, but there's so many. But it's this idea that we don't have a soul. We're just, a bunch of random, matter floating around and firing and reacting. Organic beings, then he goes on to say, organic beings like us, maybe I'll play this video, okay, where he talks about how organic beings like us operate in cycles. We work, we eat, sleep, digest, and there's no organic limitation. So yeah, I'll play this video for you.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what you said about the difference between analog and digital, or between organic and inorganic. That organic beings like ourselves, like other animals, we work by cycles. And sometimes we are on and sometimes we are off. And we need time to rest and to digest and to sleep. Right. And algorithms are not like that. Yeah. AIs, computers are always on. Mm-hmm. They don't need these cycles and they don't need to sleep and to rest. And as they become more and more dominant in the world, that more and more of the basic kind of networks and systems of the world are being manned and run by AIs. If you think about the AI apocalypse, it's not the Hollywood scenario of this one big supercomputer that tries to take over the world and destroy humans. It's more like millions and billions of AI bureaucrats that are increasingly making decisions all around us, in social media, in banks, in armies, in governments, and they are really inherently alien intelligences. I take AI as an acronym for alien intelligence and not artificial intelligence. Alien, not in the sense that coming from outer space, but in the sense that it's really alien. It's very different. It's not organic. And again, one of the key things that it's always on.
Yeah. I think you give the example of, in the programming, let's say the algorithm on YouTube, you just tell it, reinforce enhance user engagement. And it has its own ways of doing that. There's not a human necessarily telling it, put this ad here, put that ad there. Is that an example of the system?
Exactly. Again, it's still human beings who run the big social media companies like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. But the day-to-day management, the decisions about what to show you, what to recommend to you, it's increasingly done by algorithms. Yeah. And the humans give them this kind of general goal, like increase user engagement. But then the algorithms experiment and discovered, for instance, that if you want to increase user engagement, and engagement sounds something nice.
Yeah.
Be engaged. What's wrong with being engaged with the world? Well, there is something wrong, could be, with being too much engaged with the world, because the algorithms experimented on us and discovered something. It's not really a big discovery because people knew it thousands of years ago, but the algorithms also discovered it, that the easiest way to get somebody engaged, to grab your attention, is to press the hate button or the fear button or the greed button in your mind, and then you're engaged. So this is why they flood the social media platforms with more and more content that presses these buttons, and people become glued to the screens. And this is not good for us.
And the humans behind it say we're not responsible for that, when in fact they are responsible for that. I mean, it led to Myanmar and also the sort of colossal catastrophes in Brazil by that, just maximize user engagement without anybody taking responsibility on the human side for what those downstream effects were.
Yeah, I mean, they constantly try to shift the blame to the humans now.
Right.
And they say, it's the users.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a human user who created this hate-filled video, some conspiracy theory. What do you want from us? Do you want us to censor them and violate freedom of speech of a human being? And the answer is no, we don't want you to censor human beings. We just want you to take responsibility for what your algorithms are doing. If a human being decided to put on Facebook or YouTube some hate-filled conspiracy theory, that's their responsibility. And I agree that you should be very careful before you censor a human being. But that's not the problem. The problem is that then your algorithm decided to deliberately show and recommend this specific. There are so many videos on YouTube. Why did your algorithm choose to show this video and not some video on some boring sermon on compassion instead of a hateful conspiracy theory? Because this is more engaging. Okay, I understand the business model, but then you can't blame the users for the decisions and actions of your algorithms. This is the heart of the issue. And again, when it comes to engagement, this is something that I learned in like my first meditation course 24 years ago about engagement. It's very easy to engage the mind with certain types of content.
Yeah, then he goes on to tell a story about engagement. But this is really interesting. I had covered cognitive warfare document by NATO, this was by NATO Intelligence. And they talked about how, I think it was in an episode, I'm blanking on the name of it, but with Gary Bonnick Jr. And we had talked about that document. And I've done lots of threads on Twitter. You can find them on that document as well. But they talk about how they're going to weaponize human emotions against them, for psychological warfare. And they'll do it through social media algorithms. So, and that's essentially kind of what he's alluding to in that clip. He's talking about, it's very interesting that he thinks we have no free will. So it's not our fault that how we respond to things. And I'm not saying things don't impact us. Obviously they do. That's why we react. That's why we have an emotional response. I would argue that's part of being human, that partly because we do have a soul and all of that, but and we do have consciousness, individual consciousness. But yeah, that was it: political and cognitive warfare, strategic communications. And but I think that it's interesting because he is saying how these algorithms can program us, and that's what the whole field of cybernetics is all about. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's why yes, they do have this technology to do remote brain interface. I mean, that is what he was talking about. They have all the synthetic biology technology already, but they don't really need it. Yes, the Internet of Bodies, they're grooming students, but they're also grooming them on the, this is where connectivity, security, and intelligence, I can't read the first part, meets human body to transform lives, right? And it's always couched as a very positive type of thing. And I'm not saying it can't do good things. It possibly can. But this is a vehicle for the Internet of Nanobio things. And that, I think, is incredibly invasive and could be really potentially very, very dystopian and lets a lot of control outside of us as an individual. So I have many reservations and concerns about that. But with cybernetics, they've already created this kind of feedback loops that we respond to. And they're really working on advanced cybernetics now. They have the new Macy conferences, and I have that whole page pulled up as well. But I wanted to just show this article. It's called Constructing the Public in Perceptions of Research, a case of forest genomics. And I just thought this was pretty interesting because it does look like they're always studying how they can socially engineer the masses. But essentially, it does kind of look like they're trying to create consensus, particularly around this field of genomics, which I'm not to say that there are no, fruitful kind of benefits to studying genomics, but a lot of it looks like a conduit for this synthetic biology. A lot of what we see with genomics is kind of computer modeling, or this modified RNA, for instance. And I know there's a lot of speculation about what that really is, but even just the concept is this idea that we're going to modify our genetic code. And so a couple of things I wanted to point out is their use of the word dialogue, right? And dialogue is typically referring to consensus. This is rather than it being a discourse, a debate where people have individual views that may not be aligned. Dialogue is usually done amongst peers, and it's usually a very collaborative kind of discussion. And I think their use of the word is very intentional. We remember Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he argues that education should be a liberatory process for those who are oppressed, so, indoctrination, that helps the oppressed develop the critical consciousness and work towards that liberation, right? And it looks like that's what they're doing in this article. We'll pull it up, but it looks like they're doing this mass pedagogy to make it look like those who refuse the dialogue, right? Those who are outside of it, and essentially like people who reject this, kind of quote unquote science are, they're going to try and lure them. They're going to say that we need to lure them into like a mass awakening, because of course individuals can't be awakened. It has to be collective. And they want to get us all on board with this concept of genetic modification. And I think they've been doing that conditioning for a very long time with, our food, for instance, right? This is conversation of genetic modification. So I'll just read this from that article. This is just the abstract from the article. As genomic information becomes increasingly accessible across model and non-model organisms, evolutionary and ecological genomics have become essential frameworks to understand how to maintain mutation processes, selection, and drift shape biodiversity and phenotypes. The 2025 Gordon Research Conference on Ecological and Evolutionary Genomics will highlight recent advances in our understanding of interactions between genomes and their environment, covering a variety of scales over space and time, from population studies to comparative genomics, deep evolution, and theoretical model. This conference aims to shed light on how genomic diversity and structure are influenced by ecological interactions and evolutionary processes. Through a series of keynote presentations, panel discussions, and interactive workshops, participants will delve into cutting-edge research on genomic evolution, role of natural selection in shaping genetic landscape, and how environmental pressures drive genetic innovation. So this is, let me just see the title here. Okay, so then they say contemporary and scientific technological endeavors face public and political pressure to adopt open, transparent, and democratically accountable practices of public engagement. Prior research has identified different ways that experts imagine publics as uninformed and disengaged, as a risk to science, and as co-producers of knowledge. But there has yet to be a systematic exploration of how these views emerge, interact, and evolve. This article introduces a typology of imagined publics to analyze how publics are constructed in the field of forest genomics. We find that deficit of views publics have not been replaced by co-production. Instead, the deficient and co-productive approaches to publics coexist and overlap, informing both how publics are characterized and how public perceptions are studied. We outline an agenda for deepening and expanding research on public perceptions of novel technologies. Specifically, we call for more diverse and complex methodological approaches that account for rational dynamics over time. And then they have like a bunch of keywords and yeah. So it looks like they're kind of, engineering for a public perception of this type of science. Well, let's go back here. So, and I do think we're seeing that come into play quite a bit. All right, so then I wanted to talk about accelerationism, and maybe I will take a look at the chat and see how everyone is doing. Yes, great to see everyone. If you could smash the like button, and if you can support the work I'm doing, it's always greatly appreciated. I have all sorts of links below as usual. You can head to my website. I think that Rumble even has a donation. Yeah, and I have great products like the rncstore.com and the relaxsaunas.com. Promo code Quartz will get you discount on all of my products. So Patel says, "Hey Courtney, thanks for everything you do. I watch your videos, but not usually live. You're welcome." And hey, yes, they immanentize, yeah. Blame Robert Shea. That is how he spelled it. I didn't know that that's where the spelling came from. Yes, some of them are idealist. I think, yes, that's unfortunately utopianism usually ends in dystopianism. I did not have Bruce Scott on. I am not familiar with him, actually. Hi, Levi. Yes, Geoengineering Neuro Project. So you would suggest that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is not about useless eaters. Charles Galton, Darwin, the next million years. I think that it is largely about the Malthusian worldview and eugenics, actually. The covert agenda is not about doing good, it's about surveillance, eugenics, experimenting on the human herd. I agree. Absolutely. That's what it looks like. All right. Well, hi, all. Okay. So let's discuss accelerationism philosophy. Let's see, what do we have here? All right, and this is the article that I had told you Matt had shared with me: Accelerationism, AI, and Dark MAGA. And the subtitle is How an Occult Critical Theorist from Coventry Shaped the Ideology of the Tech Right and Maybe the Future of AI. And I do think he did a really great job with this. So let's talk a little bit about what accelerationism is. We've got the left. It's typically categorized into two factions, the left and the right accelerationism. The left it can be traced back to kind of Marxist theory, as the idea that capitalism contributions to the world would lead to its own destruction. Except that the 21st century concept of accelerationism is, the term accelerationism wasn't, around, obviously, during Marx's time, not in this context. So some of the notable figures would be people like Nick Schrenek. He wrote Inventing the Future, Post-Capitalism and a World Without Work. This was in 2015. And they argue for accelerating technological capitalist processes to reach a point where the system collapses, paving the way for a post-capitalist society. And this is why I say it's kind of like a immanentization of the Eschaton. They're looking to bring about this collapse, to bring what they think is going to be this heaven on earth through technology. And I see a lot of overlaps actually with Game B. I knew when I tried to look up the whether or not they support it, it says that there's discrepancies, but I do kind of see a similarity with using the technology to create a post-capitalist world. There are all sorts of different terms, they call it like the regenerative economics, the gift economy, the post-industrial, but yet with all this technology, with Web3, I don't know how, and with synthetic everything, how is it post-industrial? It doesn't really make sense to me. But those are the terms that they use. So yes, and then there's Alex Williams wrote with Nick Chernak this acceleration manifesto. It's for an accelerationist politics is what it was called, and I can post those links below. Yeah, dystopian for sure. Yes. And the bankers have always been in charge. How do they gain with AI? I think they do, actually. I'm pretty concerned about that. There's so many people in the financial industry who are talking about how the dollar collapsing is inevitable. And, there are people on all sides of the aisle, in the conversation who seem to believe that that's kind of inevitable. And they're talking about how we're going to move into some sort of a digital type of framework. Whether, even though here in America, Trump did ban CBDCs, which is great. I'm very glad that he did that. However, I think people aren't necessarily looking at some of these more decentralized, as they call them, DeFi, decentralized finance, network state types of emerging cryptocurrencies, or the possibility of even something like Bitcoin being used as the reserve currency. I think presents major potential problems for things like privacy, for the digital sovereignty, which is the term they love to use. I don't know that it's quite possible. But I do think that the central bankers do win because it creates a vehicle for all of this surveillance, right? We can go back to that patent that Microsoft did, the 0606 patent, which was on cryptocurrency and body activity data. And this is, of course, biometric data. So I think that is how they win, is they are able to use it to create tokenized economy. And this is where people will be put onto a UBI, universal basic income, and it will all be kind of gamified. I think a lot of it's going to be centered around biometric data when we start to see the emergence of 6G and the Internet of Nanobio thing. I could be wrong, and hopefully people will stop it. Maybe that will not happen. But I can tell you I've read enough to know that that's kind of what a lot of plans are laying out. So, yeah, so let's see. Okay, so then we've got the right accelerationism, which has its roots in cyberpunk culture of the 1980s, 1990s, but was not explicitly articulated till later. It draws from the philosophical works of people like Giles Deleuze and Felix Guattari. I'm much more familiar with Deleuze than Guattari, but they take a slightly different bent on it. And really, one of the key figures in this movement is Nick Land. And I actually, until really recently, was not very familiar with Nick Land at all. But I should have been, because he seems to be very influential in what we're seeing in this, I guess they call it the tech right. I don't know. These labels, this nominalism is just, I think, a kind of a very slippery slope. But, and also what we're seeing with definitely this dark enlightenment movement. And that's definitely, I think, infiltrating the right wing in a very potentially pernicious way. So that is very concerning. But he was a former academic who was associated with the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit at Warwick University. And this was a group of diverse thinkers who experimented in a conceptual production by welding together a wide variety of sources: futurism, technoscience, philosophy, mysticism, numerology, complexity theory. That's like our friend Jim Rutt there with the Santa Fe Institute. I'm sure there was some overlap there, but I have not dug into that just yet. And I don't know about between the figures, but between Santa Fe Institute and the Cybernetic Culture Research Institute, I would imagine there must be at least, ideologically or philosophically speaking. Complexity theory, science fiction, among others, and it was created by Sadie Plant and Nick Land and the philosophy department of University of Warwick, Coventry in 1995. It also included Matthew Fuller, Stephen Goodman, Codwo Eschaton, Mark Fisher, Orphan Drift, and several others. And it was organized as they organized a number of events and conferences. One of them was called the Virtual Futures, and that was in 1996. The Swarm Machines Afrofutures, also 1996. Vero Technics, in autumn 1997. And they published Collapse Journal, an abstract culture pamphlet series. And so I have found this page on the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, and it was very interesting. The first part, like when you open up this, you see we have it on the screen there from Nick Land. How would it feel to be smuggled back out of the future in order to subvert its antecedent conditions, to be cyber guerrilla hidden in human camouflage so advanced that even one's software was part of the disguise, exactly like this? That is Nick Land for you. And then I thought this was interesting, just the other names that they have. They call them aliases. So they've got Barkerism, Sea Crewism, Landian Cultism, so I'm guessing after Nick Land, Lumerian Time Warrior, Occult Posthumanism. That one actually is the one that really jumped out at me. Outsidedness Incarnate, Proto-Accelerationism, and Warwickian Cultism. So I thought just those names alone said a lot. The numerogram is the sigil of the hyperspace. And then the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit website is also kind of very creepy. And it's not that easy to get it to pull up, but so they have like all these columns here. Just, I mean, if you're watching and not listening, but if you're watching, you'll see just this, or you can go look at it on your own, but you'll see it's got this weird kind of almost a hieroglyphic looking thing that says Sigi, and then underneath it says it upside down and backwards, and it's got this very strange kind of emblem, this weird kind of postmodern looking art on it, and all these weird diagrams. But if we look, it says the twin system defined, astronomical conjunction including opposition. So this kind of like Kabbalistic kind of notion or Manichaean concept, or Freemason concepts, anatomical cranial nerve couple, proto-hemispheric brain root, schizophalization, biological, the binary synthesis of biota without unification, genus Dipoluzun, poetics, dipody, two-step metrics, a binary polyrhythm, and then the mathematical numbers of function group nullified by a double contact, Gnostic cosmogony, interconnective dyad or complementary coupling. Example, ions. In Hermetic archetypology, a basic element of the pentazygos here, lore. Cybergoth politics, convergent twinning, diploid coincidence or co-production, mesh engineering, neural or null pitch, cross-track link, feeding a current, Lumerian time sorcery, demonic implex or involved distance, making an eddy in the maze. So it goes on. I won't read all of this, but Definitely worth having a look. Yeah, they have a category on Demon, ASIS. So yeah, I'm kind of pressed for time today, so I won't go through all of this, but it was creepy. So that's the cybernetic culture research unit. And I wanted to point out that the American Society for Cybernetics is actually doing their new Macy's conference, and I think that is also pretty interesting that they have ramped that up again since this was decades ago. There's the Margaret Mead Prize. So this is the new Macy's conference is